Okay, wonderful. I'll start more formally now. Penny, I'm so excited that you agreed to be in conversation with me today. This series I'm doing is part of a residency with Gazzelli Art House, which is based out of London. And the thesis behind these conversations is um, that in my work, I've been exploring the ways in which deep individuality of women results in almost this inherent feminist perspective just because we're not fitting into existing forms, whether it's in writing or in film or in art. And then as I've been going through and doing these, I've also just been so um, I guess like indulged in excitement in getting to hear what people do, what they're passionate about. And so while the initial idea was to talk to a lot of artists and a lot of technologists, I've just started talking to women in general that I really like. So you fit into all the categories. I also love that I met you at an art gallery. I met you at Tintype Gallery in London via a friend that I met at the gallery. And um, what I was thinking about and reflecting about this morning, because that's the sort of thing I'm very much missing right now, that like serendipitous going out into the world. But then I you repopped into my consciousness because I don't know if you know the surrealist artist Penny Slinger at all. She's another British Penny, about the same age as you, and she lives here in Los Angeles, but she's an incredible um, artist who's British and named Penny. And when I went to go email her about this series, your email popped up in Gmail, and I thought, oh, that would be perfect. um, so Penny Woolcock is a filmmaker, opera maker, producer, writer, director, um, artist of all kinds. And I'd love to start with hearing you talk about how you describe what you do. And um, I know it's long, but the brief version of your story and how you feel you got here. I know you grew up in Buenos Aires, and maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, so it's difficult because I do things across, in such different forms. I write, I paint, I sometimes make things, I make films, I've directed operas, I've done documentaries and fiction. And actually, at the moment, because we're sort of locked up, I thought I've always wanted to write a novel. So I'm having a go at that. Whether it'll ever see the light of day, I don't know, but I'm really having fun doing that and making a little film about an artist. And I think for me, they kind of all come from the same well, and I don't think it even started. I think it started because I felt completely lost in the world when I was really little, and nothing made any sense to me. And so starting to kind of write and make pictures, it was a way of trying to anchor myself and to work out what was going on. And I'm sure that it saved my life. I mean, I'm very kind of, I don't think I've ever actually been depressed, but I think if I didn't have that opportunity, to be creative all the time in whatever way, I probably would have killed myself. It feels that essential in a way, like breathing, somehow to make things about the world that I see and my inner world. And I guess I've pretty much always done it. And when I was a teenager, I didn't really know what an artist was, because I lived in a community that was extremely conservative. It was the British community, both in Uruguay and in Argentina. And it's a very sort of mercantile community. So all of the men were businessmen, although you did get a few doctors and lawyers. And the women were married. That was that was the idea. And for us, we were brought up to maybe we could be a secretary or a teacher for a brief time until you caught your man, and then you became a wife and a mother. So being an artist was something that I'd kind of read about, you know, but I'd never met anybody. So it really, I had this image of myself being free, and some of it wasn't even to do with making anything. I imagined myself on a street corner in London, which I did end up in, and I had a long stripy scarf which I was throwing around my neck, and I was holding forth to various rather, you know, attractive looking men. And I thought, that's what it's going to be like being an artist. And smoking was very important to me at that time. So yeah, it was just something that was out of reach for me, and where you could be a different way, live a different way. So it's, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny too, because I mean, even like with all of the media and everything that I grew up with, when I decided in my 20s that I was going to become an artist, it was just as abstract. I didn't know any. I'd maybe like seen art, but the idea of freedom was also very vivid in my feeling of what that meant. And I wonder, I think it is quite different when people grow up, or maybe especially in film or in fine art, and you're in the system and you go to the art schools and you have all these things. And I've, fallen on my face a million times because I wasn't part of that system. But at the same time, there's that ideal of what I'm reaching for. And it's not something that a gallery can give me. It's something that maybe a scarf can give me. And I think that I love your vivid image of that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your approach when you're? I mean, I think I was specifically interested in when you have an idea, what medium you decide to use it through. And I was thinking about this in terms of like documentary versus something more fictionalized, something more feature. But I'd love for you to answer that cross medium as well, not just film.
I think in terms of the films, there'll be something that interests me, and then it sort of seems obvious to me at the time, whether it is really how it is, I don't know, that it should either be a documentary or fiction. So about 10 years ago, I spent about 8 months hanging around with homeless people in London making a documentary, and actually for me it was a journey of exploration, and I learned a lot. And the main thing that I learned was that homelessness is not really about not having a home. It's much, much deeper than that. And certainly in this country, where we have some kind of social security system that can get hold people, it's, everybody that I met had a very disturbed childhood, and where they'd either been very often sexually abused, physically abused, hideously neglected. And so giving them some tiny room in the middle of nowhere was not resolving their problem, because the problem wasn't really about not having a roof. The problem was that home represented something else to them. And so I suppose because I didn't start off thinking that I knew what homelessness was, that had to be a documentary, because I learned, for me, if I know exactly what something is going to be, it kind of doesn't interest me to make it. And one of the things that I'm very keen to do is actually, I really like football, soccer, and I'd like to make a series about women's football. And that I want to do as a fiction, and I've been writing it as a fiction, and it sort of interests me to see if I can do something really popular, that's about football, but that's about other things as well, and that has women at the centre of it. Because very often I've made things about men. It's sort of like you make something and then one thing leads to another, doesn't it? People go, how did you end up, mediating a gang truce in Birmingham? And it was really, I didn't sort of set out to do that. It was just sort of happened. And through doing films about young men in these urban environments, which are kind of quite highly criminalized with gangs and so on, I was interested because I had been robbed by somebody in the middle of the night. Somebody came up behind me, bashed me and then was kicking my head in order to get my hand back. And so at the end of that experience, I thought, well, I can either walk around and become a sort of timid old lady looking over my shoulder, worrying about whether somebody's going to do something to me, or I can get to know some robbers, and that seemed like a much better solution. So in terms of what those people were doing, because a lot of it was illegal, that had to be a fiction, because I didn't have any interest in getting people locked up in jail because of the filming. So sorry, it's kind of in the material what something needs to be, I think.
It's interesting how you said like a lot of these projects were initially focused on like young men, or these, because really I see a lot of your work as going into these cultures or these countercultures, and they're ones that you're not initially from in any way. So you've got this both protection and vulnerability of the outsider in them, which is maybe makes it more likely that they're not going to be female communities.
Yes. Well, certainly that strand of work was, although the first film that I made in those communities was called Tina Goes Shopping, and then there was Tina Takes a Break and Mischief Night. The main character was female, actually, and again it was in a kind of marginalized community where people were having to be very resourceful about how to live, because there were no jobs, and there was, here, as in the States, there was a process of deindustrialization which left people stranded. And so I'd observed just through doing other things that there was a whole culture that had grown up that was, really inventive, that I rather admired, where people were finding ways of living that weren't to do with going out and getting a job 9 to 5, because that wasn't really open to them. So the first set of those films was actually centered around a woman who I'm still really friendly with, and at that point my idea was that the people in that community would play versions of themselves. So it was fiction and it wasn't fiction, and but Kelly, who was the main girl in it, who I'd found on a council estate somewhere, has gone on to be an actress, and so she's, in fact, her life changed through doing that, and my life changed too, because we both got quite a lot of praise for that. So it's very important to me that I'm not the only one that comes out of it with something. And I'm also very aware of, sometimes people go, who do you think you are? You're not, well, I have been very poor actually at one time, as a single mother, and I was on benefits on, but I'm not that now. I come from a middle class background. I'm white. There's all this, which I really understand about cultural appropriation and who's the right to tell whatever stories. But I want to tell the stories I want to tell, and if people want to attack me for it, I'm there. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to run away from that.
That's wonderful. Could you talk a little bit more about the social impact of your work, and whether it's something that you think about as you're making it, or is it just sort of sewn into what you're interested in and therefore it happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the stories that we tell, however we tell them in whatever spaces we tell, are what make us who we are, So I certainly I don't think telling a story, making a film, a painting, having an exhibition is in of itself going to change the world. It won't. But it's part of changing the world. So if we have a big story, which is that money is the most important thing in the world, and then everybody believes it, then it becomes true. But actually, it doesn't really mean anything. It's a fiction, isn't it? So I think telling good stories is something that we really need to do. And then sometimes I've made things and they have had some kind of impact, in terms of changing policy, certainly in terms of the lives of the people in them, including, as I say, my own, because I'm not going there to be helpful. I'm going there because I'm curious and I want to make something, but I want to make it in a way that is not, well, saying not exploitative sounds kind of, I want to do it together with the people that I'm working with, and I want everybody to come out of it feeling that they've been on a journey that's been at least fun, and then some people's lives change, and sometimes it has an impact and sometimes it doesn't, and some things that you make somehow have a ripple, and then people remember them years later and they come up, and sometimes you do something and you just think, this is fantastic, and it just sinks without a trace, and you have no control over that. We just, that's once it's out there, you need a lot of luck, sometimes it hits a nerve at the right time and sometimes it doesn't.
In my own work, I've been asked quite a lot recently whether or not I consider myself an activist. And it's a question that I was very interested to hear the way you responded to that. Because for me, I've been like, okay, yes, there are activist implications of my work. There's some potential social impact. But if I start to consider myself an activist and identify with that, there's all of these responsibilities that I think can be quite burdensome to art, and the journey of art being very about, like you said, like my curiosity, like your individuality, the journey that you're interested in. So I really love the way you talk about balancing those things. And
yeah, and then you do it in the most kind of truthful way with the best heart that you can bring to it, but I don't. And sometimes when I've done things, people go, oh, you're helping us. I go, no, I'm not, I'm helping myself.
This is about me.
Well, it's about us, and I'm getting as much out of it, at least, as you are. And so, in terms of, the Jamaican heritage community in Birmingham that I've made all these films with, I mean, we've all learned a lot about each other. I go into their world and they come into mine, and we're both curious, and interested that we can float around. So I feel very, very lucky that I can do that. But I'm not doing it as a favor. And actually, if I'll go on a demonstration or whatever, on a march, and that's a very different thing, and if my work can contribute towards that because it comes out of who I am and what I'm interested in, what I believe in, that's great. But I don't censor it, and I think that when very often work that is activist work, I mean, it can be great, but it tends to be kind of one tone in a way, and a little bit fearful of being critical or saying something that might undermine the cause or whatever. And that kind of work doesn't interest me.
Yeah, that nuance of like almost feeling that you have something to say, but that it's a complicated conversation is like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oops.
So can you speak a little bit more about what led you to believe, or to continue to believe, that you could leave this very conservative community and go into that model with the scarf and the cigarette? Were there influences that you looked at, or how did you learn to really trust your intuition and curiosity?
I mean, I was desperate to get out. So it wasn't really a choice. I mean, it was survive or die, So I don't know how you did it, but because I knew that there must be artists somewhere in Buenos Aires, I just went off into the town and I was looking for artists, and I would sort of hang around galleries and look into cafes. And one day I looked into this cafe. It was called El Bar Moderno. And I saw all these people, and they had paint spattered clothes, and the men were wearing berets, and I thought, these are my people. So I went into the cafe and I ordered a little cup of coffee, and I sat there sort of hoping somebody would approach me, and also completely terrified because my mother had told me that if strange men offered you something, it would be spiked with heroin, and then you would end up in the Middle East somewhere. I think it was usually Morocco, as part of some sheikh's harem, you know, and that would be it. It was a white slave trade. So I sat there for a while looking, obviously very longingly, at this group, and one of the guys at the table got this packet of the plate of biscuits, chocolate biscuits, you know, cookies, and offered me one. And I went, no, because I knew that it would be, despite my, you know, attempt with banana skins, I didn't want to be, you know, in the white slave trade. So he could tell that I was, as though he ate half the biscuit and offered me the other half. And I felt too much of a fool not to take it. So I ate the biscuit and I just sat there. They then ignored me completely, waiting to keel over and be dragged out the back of the cafe off to Morocco, and nothing happened. So after that, I just thought, wow, I can just do anything I like, you know. And I became extremely reckless and was meeting people on the street corners and going into places and trying to hang out with the people that I wanted to be like. So it was a very naive and ridiculous journey in which I was, you know, I'd just come out of this very posh girls' school, and they all thought I was very amusing, I think.
And as a final question then, going from that very much like that hunger to be part of a community and the biscuit and the feeling, you know, like you're just trying to almost fit into a counterculture, was there like a particular like medium or work or biscuit moment for you where you realized, wait, actually, I'm going to have a table of people and they're going to want to come and sit at it and eat my biscuits?
I think at that stage, I never imagined that any of that could happen. But at the same time, you know, when you're very young and very arrogant, so I was painting really at that point. And I just thought I was fantastic. And so I would take my paintings to these, you know, joint exhibitions or whatever, open them and hang them there, and, you know, hang around hoping somebody would realize quite how brilliant I was. So I painted for years, and actually because I had a baby very young due to my misspent youth, who was a lovely baby, you know, but I used to paint on, because I couldn't afford canvases, I would buy blankets and stick sheets on them and paint on that. So I always found a way actually of making things, but I think the thing with painting that I found difficult is having your whole practice dedicated towards somebody buying something and either hanging it in their house or in a vault or something. It made me uncomfortable, you know. So I've felt, even though I've continued sort of to make work like that, I felt more comfortable with work that more people can see if they want to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. Your story is so vivid and interesting, and your work is really incredible. And I hope that